Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I am excited to have Dr. Phyllis Chesler join me as my guest later in the show today. And It's going to be a really spectacular conversation. I've really enjoyed reading her book, and she's really a pretty special person, and I think you will agree with me when you hear about her story, about her life, and all the other things that she's involved in, has been involved in over the decades. We'll talk about the world in 5 minutes. I had the opportunity this week to interact with the World Food Prize quite a bit. The World Food Prize is an annual event that takes place in Des Moines, usually definitely in October. It often happens right around Sukkot time, and sometimes it's been difficult for me to attend. But this week, this year, the Jewish holidays were early, and I was able to participate. This week, our temple's former office manager, Lucille Wilson, was awarded the Robert D. Ray Iowa Shares Humanitarian Award for her nearly 3 decades of leadership of the Iowa Hunger Hike that has raised tens of thousands of dollars to help feed hungry Iowans. And I just want to thank Lucille publicly on this show as well for being just a spectacular person and really making a difference in the lives of so many people over so many years. So thank you, Lucille, for all your efforts to help feed the hungry in Iowa. Thank you also to Congress for finally solving, at least temporarily, the shutdown that was preventing the government from helping to feed hungry people around the United States as well. We finally got through the closure of the federal government. Money is now flowing again, which enables programs like SNAP, which helps hungry people to eat, to be able to be funded by the federal government. So we really appreciate that. On a foreign policy level, things have been fairly quiet as far as action in the news, simply because the domestic policy situation in the United States was overwhelming everything else. But there have been a number of things that have gone on just in the past week, including today, Saudi Arabia taking a seat on the UN Security Council. Yes, Saudi Arabia on the UN Security Council. This is, well, we'll talk to Phyllis Chesler, who's got lots of experience dealing with Islam and dealing with traditional Islam. Maybe she has some views about this as well. And reading her book, I know she will. Having Saudi Arabia on the UN Security Council is a very interesting situation, because Saudi Arabia oftentimes has been at least funding, in a lot of ways, has come from Saudi Arabia for many terrorist organizations. Saudi Arabia certainly has an interest in the events in the Middle East, has influence with governments like the Egyptian government is currently helping to fund rebel movements in Syria. I'm not saying that Saudi Arabia is a terror sponsoring country. They're not as a country, but certainly people within that country have worked in other places around the world. We know that Osama bin Laden, for example, came from Saudi Arabia. It is an incubator, if you will, if not and not a funder necessarily. But it's an interesting situation to have them on the Security Council. The situation as far as Iran, negotiations are ongoing. Are they getting anywhere? Is this like the negotiations between the Republicans and the Democrats about the debt ceiling? I think there's some concern that yes, it is, and Iran is simply going to hold out until we can't do anything about it. And Israel has warned about that. The Iranian government seems to simply be stalling. And there was a report today I don't remember which news media outlet I saw it in, that talked about the possibility of Israel doing something on its own. I think we were talking about this several years ago at this point. I don't want to take up too much time dealing with the world in 5 minutes because I really want to get to my conversation with Phyllis Chesler. And so I'm going to cut the world in 5 minutes to actually 5 minutes. I'd like to thank Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa for his funding of this show and enabling me to bring wonderful guests to you every week and help you with the understanding of the world. We will be right back after a short break with Dr. Phyllis Chesler.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Yes, now your favorite programs on Webcast One Live can all be watched and listened to on any Android or Apple device, your phone, tablet, or iPad. Yes, your favorite shows on Webcast One Live are available live or on podcast wherever you go. Let me introduce to you some of our great shows.
Shalom. Every week on Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman, we'll talk about issues in the Middle East, issues related to the Jewish tradition and religious traditions in general, and keep you up to date on exactly what's going on around the world. You may know some of the story, but you haven't heard all of the story until you've heard it on Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman and our special guests we have on every week.
Hi, I'm Doc. You listen to me every Tuesday from 6 to 7 p.m. on Doc and Lefty radio podcast program, where we discuss all the relevant topics of the day, including state, local, and national politics. My partner in crime, Lefty, often likes to have a little bit of conservative justice served upon him, so please turn in for the fireworks every week from 6 to 7 p.m. on Tuesdays at webcastonelive.com. Thank you.
So when you want to watch your favorite Webcast One program, remember, there's an app for that. You know, there's an app for that.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. And I'm excited to have with me via Skype Dr. Phyllis Chesler. Phyllis Chesler is an Emerita professor of psychology and women's studies at City University of New York. She's a best-selling author, legendary feminist leader, a psychotherapist, and an expert courtroom witness. Dr. Chesler has published thousands of articles, and most recently studies about honor-related violence, including honor killings. She has published many classic works such as Women in Madness, Mothers on Trial, The Battle for Children and Custody, and Women's Inhumanity to Women. She has just recently published her 15th book in October 2013, titled An American Bride in Kabul, which I have been reading and have just, it's just amazed me. So Dr. Chesler, let's talk a little bit about your book and about all the things that you have been doing. Welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Rabbi.
I can tell you recently in your book, I've been kind of reading along. I wanted to start kind of with one of the later portions first, because I just mentioned that Saudi Arabia was now joining the Security Council. And you have a quote. I don't know what page it's on in the book because I have it on my Kindle. But you say, in the name of freedom, they demand, talking about Islamists now, they demand the right to renounce freedom. In the language of tolerance, they demand that intolerance be granted a dignified place at the table.
Yes. And I'm describing Islamists, and their first victims are other Muslims. But now they've gone global and they've gotten to the entire world. And ironically, long ago, I was held hostage, in a sense, in Kabul, Afghanistan, which is what I write about and what I've learned from. It's a very expensive education. And Saudi Arabia threw out bin Laden. Sudan threw out bin Laden. Imagine how bad you have to be exiled from those two countries. And Afghanistan gave him shelter. And that very country is where he plotted his al-Qaeda terrorist attacks, which are ongoing and are far beyond al-Qaeda. So Afghanistan as a place, as a time, as a theme, as a lesson for us all has been a writer's treasure for me.
It's interesting for me, or was interesting for me, to read your narrative about being in the environment you were in Afghanistan, and then thinking about our biblical traditions as well, about how Hagar and Sarah related. You can go through the relations of the matriarchs in our tradition, or talking about the story of Esther and Vashti in the book of Esther. I kept finding parallels constantly with, no matter what I read in the Jewish tradition, saying, you know what, I heard Phyllis Chesler, I saw Phyllis Chesler talking about this, and it connects so well.
That's so interesting. When I stepped into Kabul, it was like stepping into the Bible, into the Torah, because there were people in turbans and camel caravans and nomads. It could have been our ancestors. And over the years, I've joked, I was looking for Yerushalayim, but I took the long route via Kabul. Now, many, many Jews have lived in the Islamic world and have been both saved there and perennially persecuted there and held ransom there and impoverished and exiled and murdered in Muslim majority countries. And when I was in Afghanistan, I never met a single Jew. In doing the research for this book, I discovered, to my amazement and shock, that the Jews and the Hindus had been the bankers and the traders and the import-export mavens for the country. But by the late 1920s, the Afghan king began making alliances with Nazi leaders and then with the Nazi government, and overnight, by edict, impoverished all the Jews and the Hindus of the country. And ironically, again, the Muslim bank by Muslims for Muslims, and my father-in-law was one of the three founders of that modern banking system, was taken away. That capacity to bring banking into the modern age was taken away from the Jews and the Hindus of the country. It made my head spin, because I would never, ever have met my Afghan husband had he not had the wealth that would have given him an education in the West. Think about it.
You talk in your book about your relations with your mother-in-law and how she treated her servants. And, you know, that's one of the things in particular in dealing with the story of Sarah and Hagar that I found very interesting, and, you know, dealing with multiple wives as well and how they relate to one another or don't relate at all. And I think we have interesting expectations of
I have
that.
to slightly not disagree, but Rabbeinu Gershom outlawed polygamy. Jews are not polygamists.
Mm-hmm.
And polygamy is a human rights violation. And because I lived in a polygamous household, I saw what it really means. And the positive spin is, unlike the West, good Muslim men don't divorce their wives and send them out into the wilderness the way Abraham sent out Hagar.
Mm-hmm.
Good Muslim men keep them. They don't talk to them, and they then have new younger wives living next door or under the same roof. And sometimes the older wife becomes the slave driver of the new younger wife, and sometimes it's reversed. And then there's a third wife that comes into the picture, and this is true of my father-in-law, who had 3 separate dwellings and 3 different wives, none of which I knew about before I got there. It was my husband who never mentioned it. And polygamy means that the first wife leads a celibate life forever, a life without affection forever, except to be the affection that one gains from one's children or from one's female relatives. Mainly perhaps from one's sons, but I would be very careful in terms of the parallels. So, for example, a kippah is like hijab, a head covering. I have no problem with it. But a burqa is a sensory deprivation isolation chamber, which should be banned. So it's not the same. It may appear to be similar or analogous or reminiscent of things that we know in Judaism, but if you look into it more deeply, it's not true.
Well, let's talk about the burqa just for a bit, just because you mentioned it, and I wanted to get to that eventually. Let's talk about the issue of religious freedom and things like a burqa. With the people in the Muslim community who will claim, for example, that the opportunity to wear a burqa should be a religious freedom that they should be allowed to have, versus saying that this is a way of oppressing people and you shouldn't be allowed to do that. So what is your thought?
I work with religious Muslim feminists, ex-Muslim feminists, and Muslim dissidents, and with Quranic scholars. The Quran does not command that a woman's face be veiled or that she be completely removed from public discourse. What the Quran says is that men and women both should dress modestly. That's what it says. And modestly can mean a head covering. It could mean long skirts or loose garments. And that's where it begins to resemble a similarity to the extreme cults that are Haredi or Hasidic. Again, you can see the woman's eyes, and she can see, hear, taste, talk, and you see her identity. It's not hidden. The burqa is a different matter. It's a custom. It's a minhag. It's not halakha, so to speak. It's not a religious law. And if you look, as I did in the book, 100 years, 150 years of history in Muslim countries, you had feminists fighting and winning the right to go unveiled, naked face, sometimes with the help of monarchs and sometimes not. In Persia, in Afghanistan twice in the 20th century, in Turkey, in Lebanon, definitely, in Jordan, all of it, in Egypt, totally. All of a sudden, the women are wearing sheets again. It's very regressive. It's not about religious freedom. It's about the ownership of women as Islamist flags to be flown, so to speak, in the streets of the West and in the streets of the East. It is not a religious right or a religious obligation. And I agree. It's very tricky. You don't want the state to tell a woman what she must wear or what she can't wear, right? But on the other hand, if girls and women are on a kill for refusing to wear hijab, a head veil, or a face veil, niqab, or a burqa, then we have to be very careful about having burqas in our midst. And they are killed for this reason.
Now, I have worked with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser over the years, and we had many conversations about reforms of Islam, just like Judaism was reformed, the Reformed Jews, the origins of the Reform movement in the 19th century, and needing to create a new leadership in order to promote these kind of reforms. you have, I know, done a lot more work with what we'd say as moderate Muslims, but also Muslims that are interested in reform of Islam. Can you tell us a little bit about your ideas with that and how your understanding of Afghanistan when you were there helped with that understanding as you progressed over the course of the years?
The Muslims who are trying to reform Islam and who are also resisting the barbarism that is really custom, not religion, or some would say resisting the barbarism that is the religion itself, are so heroic. It is the major resistance movement of our time. And women's rights is at the center of it, as is the entire Western enterprise of values such as individual rights, gay rights, women's rights, the right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the right to dissent, the right to criticize religion, and the right not to be coerced into it against one's will. Similarly, if one wants to practice religion, one should not be forbidden. It should be kept separate from the state. There should be a separation of mosque and state. And I know that Dr. Chesler agrees with that point of view, as do so many other brilliant, brave, both secular and religious Muslims. And I stand with them.
We encounter in dealing with these changes a huge, I should say this, a huge challenge of the fact that there aren't religious leaders as far as clerics who are standing up and promoting these things. And I had talked to Dr. Chesler about the idea that Reform Judaism ended up creating its own seminary because it had to train its own rabbis to do this kind of work. How do you think that this reform movement can progress if the leaders on the religious side that everyone is looking toward oppose it?
Well, let's provide a little context. The moment somebody stands up, and I've read many memoirs by Afghans and by other Muslim writers, and says the mullah does not know what he's talking about, people shouldn't follow him, he's cruel, he beats his wife, he beats his children, he allows you to do the same, this is wrong, not in God's name, that person is shot down dead. And I'm thinking now of Pakistan, and not only the persecution of Pakistani Christians, but the persecution of Pakistanis who don't want to lead a Taliban-esque life. So it's easy for us here in America, thus far, to say, well, we can speak our minds, and we can. But in countries like Afghanistan, where amazingly people still stand up, they do get shot down. And one of the questions that I've been asked a lot lately is, well, then should America leave Afghanistan? Did it have any business going there in the first place? And I'm struggling with a very wrenching moral dilemma. I think the boots on the ground have also been responsible for the humanitarian project in that cursed, godforsaken land, and that with the retreat, and retreat we must, the country will be plunged backward to the 7th century. And that means that all the women who are now womaning shelters for battered women and counseling rape victims and helping women actually leave one city where her entire extended family wants to kill her because she won't marry her first cousin or won't marry a man old enough to be her grandfather or wants to leave a man who's been beating her almost to death. All of those projects, plus the education and medicine at whatever level it exists, will be poof, gone overnight. So, yes, I think America should not try to do that which is not possible, even though it's morally desirable. It seems not to be possible. Because even after blood and treasure has been expended maximally. You have leaders, you have people behaving the way they've behaved historically in that country, which I knew nothing about when I got there. One tribe against the other, one clan against the other, one ethnic group against the other, as a way of life, as a permanent way of life. Wrath, corruption, nepotism, greed, the entire human condition, unchecked as a way of life permanently. And the question is, so how do you change that? How do you, maybe the change needs to happen in America first. Maybe it needs to happen in a Europe that has not been intimidated into a politically correct view of Israel is the demon state, Islam is the savior religion that's been crucified, and we as Europeans care more about charges of racism than about anything else, even though Europeans don't truly care about racism. You could ask me what I mean by that.
Well, I'll ask you what you mean about it. What do you think about how Europe deals with its Muslim community? I mean, I've talked to French people who seem to be afraid of the Muslim community. The same thing in Britain, and I don't know whether they even have a relation really. That they don't seem. They almost seem to say they're going off on doing their own thing, and that they're just gonna, apply policies that if they don't bother them, they expect if they don't bother the Muslims, they expect the Muslims not to bother them. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Oh, it's a disaster, and Europe is lost. And I'm certainly not the first or the only one to be saying this. The history is originally Europe wanted cheap labor, and cheap labor came, and it came to stay, and then it invited cousins, aunts, uncles, and wives to also come. And that might be fine if the desire would be to integrate, assimilate, and to become European. But it turned out that was not the mass desire. The desire was to live in Lahore, but in Paris, live in Algiers, but in Paris. So the closed, separatist, violent, hostile group of Semites that have replaced the 6 million Semites that Europe slaughtered, the Jews, are now almost a horrible curse visited on Europe because, and when I said the Europeans are racist, they're using Israel as the Jew, as the Jewish state. You see, that's really a Nazi state. We were right to have killed them all, and the good Semites are with us, and we let them do whatever they want, even terrify us, even become not productive members of our society. And a friend of mine in Norway said they always know when a Muslim family has immigrated and moved in because they get all new furniture, they get a state-subsidized apartment, a nice one, they get all kinds of welfare, and they never have to work. They don't have to learn Norwegian, and they don't have to become productive members. Now, to me, that is, at bottom, a very soft kind of racism. One standard of being a European, universal human rights for Westerners, and a different and lower standard for a separate entity in the heart of every major European country. Listening to the satellite programs of hate and propaganda and not assimilating. And I am very concerned about providing asylum to those whom are being persecuted by Islamists and killed. And that's a lot of people to give political asylum to. But I fear that Europe, think of Malmo as Jews, think of Malmo, think of where it's not really safe to wear a kippah. And I've been asked to speak there, and I'm thinking about it because I don't see the point of trying to preach reason to a lynch mob. I think that's what it would be now. So so now Europe has inherited whirlwinds. They didn't stop the Holocaust. They didn't stop the genocide or a second Holocaust, as I saw it, beginning with the Al-Aqsa Intifada, as it began to hit civilian Israel. And now, even though they're supporting the Palestinian cause and not noting that Islam is the largest practitioner of both gender and religious apartheid for real in the world, not Israel, not tiny Israel, they are now going to be wiped out as a civilization. It's very tragic.
Well,
if you have anything, a hopeful sign to share, other than France has now banned the burqa, and there's a lot of blowback because of it. A little bit late in the day, some European countries are beginning to fight back or to fight for their civilizational identity.
But we're also getting radical right-wing parties in some of those countries. I know the party of Le Pen made gains in recent elections, and there's concern that they could make major gains in the upcoming national elections. What are your thoughts on the rise of the far right, the anti-immigrant, pro-nationalist movements? Greece, France. I think we're seeing more of those, and I would expect to see even more because of the situation we're in.
I don't know enough about it to speak in any expert kind of way, but I don't think that the rise on the right, which may be in response to being terrorized, and which also may be the kind of endemic racism and xenophobia that Europe has known historically on its own, I don't know whether that is as great a danger as the possibility of the Islamification of Europe. I don't think I'm not in favor of it. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think it's as great a danger at this moment. Do you?
What I'm seeing, I mean, I don't see it in most places. I just saw the article about France, I think yesterday, and I don't remember a whole lot of details. I think they were local elections, but there seems to be more of this kind of right-wing reaction going on, and it seems to be anti-Muslim reaction. It's not so much, I mean, the Jews get caught up in it. Because, of course, you know, anytime there's criticism of minorities, Jews get caught up in it. So the far-right movements don't like Jews or Muslims, but it seems to be like they're focused on Muslims in a number of these places.
The Jewish situation, the far-right never liked Jews, and the Nazis are socialists, and they're national socialists and right-wingers, and they never liked Jews. And Jews have been seen as both capitalists and communists, and we have been both. We have been seen as particularists and unacceptably too narrow provincial, and we've been seen as too universal with no allegiance to a particular nation state and belonging nowhere. I mean, it's almost from the Megillat Esther, the people who's making trouble and they fit in nowhere, they belong nowhere, let's get rid of them. So I think the ancient hatred of Jews is the real story, and there is no comparable history of hating Muslims. It's true, America, for example, and Europe have had slaves, and mainly slaves of color. Slavery has been abolished. In America, a bloody civil war was fought on that issue, and we make progress, however little or however much it is. In the Islamic world, slavery still exists. Nobody has a bad conscience about it. And treating servants like indentured servants or like slaves is normalized. It's accepted. It's not unusual. So I think we have to, especially as good people and as people concerned with Jewish destiny and a Jewish future, we have to not say that the persecution of Jews is like the persecution of Muslims, because it's not. It's totally, I mean, Muslims have persecuted Jews and Christians, the people of the book, and they have persecuted Buddhists and Zoroastrians, people, and Hindus, people not of the book. And that has been from the beginning of Islam. So Jews, who has loved Jews? Do tell me. Who has loved Jews? The Jews who win all the Nobel Prizes for science and medicine, and whose inventions, miraculous inventions, benefit humanity. Who loves Jews?
Some of the evangelical Christians, but that's...
Yes, yes. And I take great heed to saying just that. But, you know, the evangelical Christians love Israel. And, of course, people have said, but don't you understand, Phyllis, that's because they think that their second and ultimate and only and real Messiah will come once all Jews are ingathered in that place. And then you'll have to convert. And I said, well, I'm not going to. You know, I'll fake them out at the last moment. So, but the Vatican may not love Israel. This is a new and interesting book that I'm reading right now. It's not out yet, by Giulio Miati, called J'accuse, the Vatican and the Jews. So, you know, when I criticize, when I defend Israel, and I've become a politically incorrect person for having done so. When I defend Israel, I'm able to say, and when I criticize Islam as a religion, I have such an easy, tricky way out because I say, look, I'm on record suing the government of Israel on behalf of Jewish women's religious rights. And I'm involved in a movement that is most historic and magnificent and extraordinary to grant Jewish women religious rights. And at the same time, there are Muslim women who are fighting for a friendlier to women place in the mosque. They're struggling and they're not getting even as far as we're getting. Imagine if the struggle to daven at the Kotel, to pray at the Western Wall, which has most recently led to terrible riots and much violence and soul-shattering curses and arrests. Imagine a similar struggle taking place in Mecca or Medina. It couldn't happen, or in Kabul. Yeah. So even Israel at its worst is allowing for the reformation of Judaism, for the transformation and for the, if you will, the feminization or the, I don't know what the right word is because it's really the missing other face of God that we're about.
The divine feminine.
Yes, that's good. The divine feminine.
Which has been, you know, part of the Jewish tradition, or at least part of the Israelite tradition, for a very long time. You know, you're talking to somebody who, as a rabbinical student in 1996, led co-ed worship in the Kotel Plaza I didn't realize it was even a problem. My fellow students did it in 1996. We brought our prayer books, we wore our kippot, we came down, we sat at the back of the plaza by where the flags are, and we did Kabbalat Shabbat the week before our religious school, our seminary program started. And Jeff, I can't remember his last name, the guy who finds places for the students to go every Friday night. He came over at the last minute as we were singing Adon Olam and warned us that it probably wasn't a good idea. But we got through the whole service at a co-ed service at the Kotel Plaza in 1996.
Erev Shabbat.
So
send me that information. But if you had a Torah with you, if it was a Monday, Thursday, or a Shabbos,
yes,
you had a Torah, and if there were women wearing talesim, or women wearing tefillin, or women who were laning from the Torah, you might have for different reception.
Absolutely. And we actually had some Haredim come over and look at us and wonder what we were doing when we were praying, because we were clearly praying, but they weren't wearing the garb that I think would have attracted all the attention. But I as a Reform Jew, and I obviously you're very involved with women as well. I as a Reform Jew have part of me says, what's so special about the Western Wall? We believe that God is everywhere. We believe that, we call our synagogues temples precisely because they replaced the temple in Jerusalem in the classical Reform tradition. So here we are, making a big deal about being at that spot. But then there's another part of me that says, I want to be able to go anywhere, and that spot is special to me. I went to Jerusalem as a student, and one of the places I wanted to go right away was the Western Wall and say a prayer at the Western Wall. And then there's the part of me that says, who is anybody else to tell me where I can't pray? What are...
Yes. Well, you've captured some of the emotions, but the Jews should be able to live anywhere. The Arab Muslim world has been ethnically cleansed of Jews. And telling Jews that they can't live in certain areas of Jerusalem or Judea and Samaria is as bad as telling a Muslim or a Christian that they can't live there. Similarly, at the Kotel, a place of such Jewish yearning and longing for sovereignty and for ancestral memory, and in our prayers during exile, this is the place we're thinking of. So why Israel and why not Uganda? Why was there a tumult when Herzl raised the possibility of, okay, we could have some refuge from persecution in Europe in Uganda? Because Uganda is not our ancient homeland. So the Kotel, only the outer retaining wall, not the real deal. Okay, the outer retaining wall is the symbol so much. Why not allow not just women praying with women only so that Orthodox women can join women of all denominations? It's one different kind of definition of pluralism. Why not allow that at the Kotel and allow mixed gender prayers also at the Kotel and separate gender prayers? It's a very large place. And time sharing and making time sacred or making, turning time sacred is something that Jews know about brilliantly. So why not be able to work it out at the Kotel? And especially at a time in history when the Israeli public, even the secularists and the agnostics, have decided that the Haredim have been living on the public trough long enough, and that they have to do army service and they have to get educations that lead to marketable positions. And for the Iluim, the geniuses, I'll personally myself subsidize somebody to sit and study in a yeshiva if they're really talented, but not if they're bumpkin. What's the point? So I think this is a time in Israel where the forces for democracy and for pluralism is rising, and at the same time, the resistance to it is also rising. Hence the Haredi control or the Haredi turning of the Kotel, which is a national and Jewish treasure, into a shtibel that is a Haredi-style shtibel. This is wrong, and the Israeli government should never have given in to such hooligan tactics, such intimidation and use of violence instead of running the state through the use of law.
Now, I have an idea how you're going to respond to this, but it's bothered me, and I want to hear you say it because I'm sure I agree with your response to this. I have a problem with the progressive movements being willing to accept appalling compromises. And I've seen it in the conversion issue. I've seen it in wedding issues and other things. I mean, we should have the rights to practice our religion the way we're supposed to practice our religion in our religion. And why do you think we're accepting these compromises that allow the Orthodox to continue to maintain a monopoly on all the practice and say you're not good enough?
What a good question. And you're right. You're a mind reader. You know how I'm going to answer it. I think that the Sharansky proposal, and I have worked with Nassan Sharansky, and he's a hero, is a Helm vision. And what it does is it banishes the Torah from the women's section, and it banishes the reform and conservative and renewal and reconstructionist movements to the Robinson's Arch. Now, this is crazy to accept this. Now, I understand that, you know, people don't always want to fight, and they want to have a place that's dignified and quiet where they can hold celebration. Certainly B'nai Mitzvah, weddings, what have you. I understand that desire, but to compromise and go away, quote, like Jews, dejected, to basically accept a loss and spin it as a victory is so troubling. So perhaps on this, I mean, the Hotel Plaza is so big. I don't understand why, with goodwill. I mean, I do understand. I mean, the idea of the Orthodox are feeling, or the Haredi and Hasidic Orthodox are feeling the earth trembling beneath their feet. Anything that's different from what they do, because they're trying to uphold Judaism with their whole hearts, could mean the end of it all. So they're fighting for their very lives. In this, it's cult-like, and it begins to then resemble the cult of Islam or the cult of Islamism. It has to be one way, my way, and if not, we'll kill you, or we'll hurt you, or we'll intimidate you, and we'll make it so unpleasant that you leave. This is where we are now.
There's so many changes in countries around Israel, and there are three in particular that I think we need to at least touch on, and I want to hear your thoughts on. One is Iran, and what the prospects are from democracy, much less the nuclear issue. I want to deal with the democracy and the situation for women in Iran, but also Egypt and Turkey right now, and the tremendous changes with the growth of the kind of Muslim Brotherhood-oriented Turkey, and then the collapse of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and the rise of al-Sisi and the military. What are your thoughts on those three countries as far as what's going on? It's a big picture here, but and you can talk about it, divide it up any way you want.
The big picture is that our country, our president, failed the Green movement in Iran when they were marching in the streets and dying in the streets. And Iran is threatening genocide against Israel, and I suggest we take the threat very seriously. I do not think we can negotiate. I don't think negotiation will work. It will not stop them from becoming a nuclear power a la North Korea. And Iran is a terrible place for women, children, artists, dissidents, thinkers, and they're trapped there. And we could have supported the Iranian population that was rising up in resistance, but we didn't. In fact, to my shame, I believe President Obama weighed in saying, oh, that's not very nice to kill your people in the street, young people too. He did so maybe 5 days after the French prime minister did. That was not acceptable. And I'm not saying we should go in boots on the ground and take the country down. I don't know what to do, but we should stand for certain values, and those values are universal. And even if we can't implement them ourselves, we should not call an apple an orange. So Iran is a menace and a danger, and I believe they sit on the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, a place where I once worked, and learned a great deal about how tyrants are using the democratic American dollar. and not helping their own people. Now, Egypt, we should support Egypt. The Islamists, whether it's Hezbollah or Muslim Brotherhood or Al-Qaeda wannabes that are flocking into Syria, and they were in Egypt, they need to be defeated, and the defeat has to be military. And the Egyptian generals seem to be doing just that. They have closed down more tunnels between Sinai and Gaza than Israel ever did. Tunnels for smuggling weapons and for smuggling human beings, Israeli human beings. So I think we have to support, and we should not, by the way, desert our allies as we've done. And we did that in Egypt, and we shouldn't do it again. I don't view the Muslim Brotherhood as an ally of mine. The Muslim Brotherhood is very active in America and all over the world, and it's very dangerous. And yes, it does some good social work projects, but that's not its main aim. Its main aim, I'm sorry to say, is a revived vision of a caliphate and a completely Islamic world to be obtained through military means and economic means and legal means. So, and the women are now veiling in Egypt, and 90% of the women in Egypt undergo female genital mutilation, which is an African custom, but has also spread to Islamic Indonesia. So it's traveling along Muslim routes, although it began as an African custom and certainly is very endemic in Somalia and Sudan. Now, what was the third country, Turkey or perhaps Sudan?
Turkey. We could talk Sudan too. I do a lot of work with Sudan, but let's talk Turkey briefly.
Well, Turkey is rapidly becoming even more dangerous than it was, becoming more Islamist, more anti-Israel. And when you ask about why a compromise or why appease aggressors, I don't know what was behind Israel's agreeing to apologize for the Mavi Marmara, which was an act of terrorism against Israel. So Turkey, which had unveiled its women early on under Kemal Atatürk, sophisticated Turkey, exciting Istanbul, it's becoming more Islamist. And I believe its latest alliance is with China. Am I right?
Yeah, they've made alliances with all kinds of people. Well, one of the things I thought was interesting today was there was a newspaper, it was an article in the Times of Israel about the fact that Turkey revealed 10 Israeli Mossad contacts in Iran who were later executed by Iran in punishment for the Mavi Marmara incident, in theory. So we got an ally, a NATO ally of Turkey here who's literally helping Iran.
Well, we did not admit Turkey into NATO. That was a huge, or am I wrong? Wait a minute.
We did. They're in NATO.
It was the European Union that was conflicted about admitting Turkey. And I would not keep Turkey in NATO.
Absolutely not.
I totally. And I also would stop funding the United Nations. I mean, at the risk of sounding like John Bolton, this is not an organization that stopped the genocide in Rwanda or that stopped the genocide in Sudan. And where I became interested in Sudan was what I called the gender cleansing of the girls and women. Mm-hmm. And it was repeated public gang rape of women and children, mainly by ethnic Arab Muslims, and mainly of African black Muslims, Christians, and animists. And I could not get American feminists to pay attention to this. It was mind-boggling because rape has become not just a spoil of war, but a weapon of war. And we saw that in Serbia, Bosnia, or Herzegovina. And it's as if the reason for the UN's coming into being that bad things should never happen again, forget it. They do not prevent a thing. They do a lot of talking. They do a lot of partying. And they have done only one thing. the UN has succeeded only in legalizing the demonization of Israel, which is the only thing that they can accomplish. They've done nothing else. That's my opinion.
You know, I do a lot of work with the Sudanese community here, with Darfuris and Nuba and South Sudanese, too. We have a very large community in Des Moines. So I was actually at an African cultural event with my Darfuri, Nuba, and South Sudanese friends yesterday as part of the World Food Prize here in Des Moines. We talk about all those things fairly regularly. We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about your book and whatever projects you're working on. The main thing I want to know from your book is, what message do you want the viewers of this show and other people to know after reading your book? What is the primary thing that you want people to understand?
Young girls are very naive. And when we fall in love, we follow our hearts. We don't do enough research. And we then may end up in very dangerous situations, which, if you survive that, you become a more knowledgeable and stronger person. I learned how valuable my American passport was because it was removed from me. And I became a citizen of no country and the property of one Afghan family. And I never got that passport back. But I also have yearned to the East. And I tell tales in the book of other women who've traveled eastward and who've done fabulous, mystical, magical things and very athletic mountain climbing and great adventures. And I had originally wanted just my story part of their much larger story. But when the persecution of Muslim women became so suddenly savage, so swiftly, I felt, no, I had to explain that my American feminism may very well have been forged in Kabul, Afghanistan in the early 1960s, and that we are connected. And then 9/11 happened, or the Al-Aqsa Intifada happened first, and then 9/11 happened, and I realized that I'd have to also come to grips with terrorism, what it means, where it's coming from, what it means for all of us. The book is also filled with love for the places I've visited and the people who protected me. It was mainly some of the women in this polygamous family who protected me and were very warm and very tender. And for reasons like that, you know, I think women are particularly interested in religion and in the hope that there'll be family and community that you can count on through it. So it's a good read, and it's a book that I put off writing for 50 years. And I also tell the story of the man I married who became a reformer in his country and remains a misogynist to this day in our country because he escaped after the Soviet invasion. And he was a dreamer, and he thought that I would be able to help him with a group of people bring that country into the 20th century. Well, he failed. And I don't think that it's possible to succeed, or it wasn't at that time. Let us hope that at some other time it may be possible. So there's a lot of different stories and people and facts and memories and lessons that are in this book.
I recommend, highly recommend, An American Bride in Kabul by Dr. Phyllis Chesler. It's really a wonderful, not only just a narrative of her life during those years and what happened since, but it's a great way to understand culture and to learn more about Islam. I also highly recommend that you follow what Phyllis Chesler does in her many endeavors. She's a person who advocates for things that are very close to my heart, for women's rights, for freedom around the world. and for the nation of Israel. I feel very close to what you stand for, Phyllis, and I cannot thank you enough for being my guest on the show today, and I look forward to working with you more in the years to come. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you for a really wonderful interview.
You're welcome. This has been Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. Have a good week.
From the